So, on Monday evening, the government finally published the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, or WAB, ready for a vote the following day. This is different from the meaningful votes that have been held in the past, although it is as, if not more, important. The vote on the WAB was one of two votes set to take place yesterday, the other being a vote on the government's timetable for Brexit, the programme motion. In this video, we're going to explain what the WAB and the programme motion are, and then discuss how Parliament voted and what this means for Brexit going forward. Before we do though, you should follow us across other social networks. You can find us simply by searching for TLDR News. Under Section 13 of the EU Withdrawal Act, there are 4 conditions for the ratification of the withdrawal agreement. 1. The agreement, political declaration and a framework for the future relationship all have to be laid before Parliament. 2. They have to be approved by a meaningful vote. 3. The Lords have to approve it in a debate within 5 days. And 4. An Act of Parliament containing provision for the implementation of the Withdrawal Agreement has to be passed. And this Act of Parliament is the Withdrawal Agreement Bill that they were talking about yesterday. So the Withdrawal Agreement Bill has been sitting around since February, but the government have refused to publish it up until now. It was only published at the beginning of this week because the government's now in a bit of a rush to get the deal through before the end of the month. And even now, this wasn't their original plan. Both Johnson and May attempted to get a meaningful vote passed before the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, simply because the WAB is a more technical piece of legislation, and thus harder for them to get through Parliament. They hoped that a successful meaningful vote would give them some momentum to help them get the WAB through. This is what Johnson originally tried to do this week. His plan was to hold a meaningful vote on Monday, and then introduce the WAB later in the week. This didn't go to plan though, as Speaker John Bercow told him that he couldn't bring forward another meaningful vote because he'd already tried to hold one on Saturday. So, what is the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, and why is it harder for the government to pass than a meaningful vote? Well, basically, the WAB translates the around 500-page withdrawal agreement into domestic UK law. So, if you found the withdrawal agreement too technical and full of legal jargon, you're going to hate this one. Because it's a 115-page bill, full of so much legal detail, it requires a lot of scrutiny. Similar bills relating to EU treaties have typically taken between 10 and 40 days to get through Parliament. For example, the EU Withdrawal Act took 38 days of parliamentary sitting, spread over 9 months. In fact, the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act requires that any treaty, like the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, be laid out before the House of Commons for a minimum of 21 days before it can be ratified. There are only 8 sitting days before October 31st, so the government published an ambitious programme motion detailing how they plan to get all of the legislation through the Commons and Lords, and the bill itself includes an exemption from the 21-day rule set out in the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act. The bill also repeals Section 13 of the EU Withdrawal Act, so there doesn't need to be another meaningful vote. The programme motion gives the House of Commons until Thursday to scrutinise it, so between 1 and 2 days. To put this in context, the Lisbon Treaty was debated over 11 days, the Maastricht Treaty for 23 days, and the Treaty of Rome for 22. And each of these treaties were debated over a period of months. It's not just the technical legal stuff. These massive bills also have to be scrutinised properly because the government could sneak in provisions that weren't explicit in the withdrawal agreement. This actually happened to a huge piece of Brexit legislation, the Great Repeal Bill. You might remember 2 years ago when May brought the bill to Parliament. It was only supposed to be for repealing the 1972 European Communities Act, as well as transplanting certain EU laws into UK law. However, the bill actually granted the government so-called Henry VIII powers to amend primary legislation without parliamentary approval. Also, on a more general level, anything that's about to become the law of the United Kingdom should be at least double-checked. Perhaps the most suspicious thing about this is that both Theresa May and Boris Johnson have refused to publish the Withdrawal Agreement Bill in advance, when all of this could have been avoided if they just published it earlier. Even if the government do pass this programme motion, there's still no guarantee that it will be enough to get it through the House of Commons by October 31st. The first reason is that the government can't control the Lords' timetable, so they might not be able to deliver the result by October 31st. The second is that if Parliament decides to amend the motion, say to add a customs union, then Parliament will be voting on something very different from what the EU have agreed to. So getting it ratified would require Johnson to return to the EU to renegotiate. So, enough background. What happened when MPs voted on the Withdrawal Agreement Bill and the programme motion? Well, the bill was debated all afternoon, until at 7 PM MPs voted on the second reading of the bill. If you don't know how laws pass through Parliament, we have a video which explains this. Essentially though, this is the second stage, which comes before detailed analysis and amendments, and then the third and final reading. However, this vote was still significant, because it was the first time that MPs had got the chance to vote on the deal itself, and indicate whether they supported the deal.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. Division! Clear the lobby! Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 329. The noes to the left, 299.
So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Point of order, the Prime Minister.
Point of order. Let me say in response, Mr. Speaker, how welcome it is, even joyful, that for the first time in this long saga, this House has actually accepted its responsibilities together, come together and embraced a deal. Because just a few weeks ago, hardly anybody believed that we could reopen the withdrawal agreement, let alone abolish the backstop, and certainly nobody thought that we could secure the approval of the House for a new deal.
As you just saw, MPs voted in favour of this deal by a surprisingly large margin of 30, with 329 votes for and 299 against. This is a pretty significant vote, and it's the first time that MPs have ever voted to support a Brexit deal. Remember that MPs rejected all of the votes related to May's deal, and this is the first time that they've actually been positive about a deal. Immediately after this vote, MPs voted on the programme motion, which proposed rushing legislation through the House of Commons in 2 days so that the UK could leave the EU by the 31st of October. The government knew this was going to be a tight vote, so to try and persuade undecided MPs, they threatened to cancel the bill altogether and go for a general election instead if the programme motion were to fail.
The Prime Minister.
Let me be very clear that I will in no way allow months more of this. If Parliament refuses to allow Brexit to happen and instead gets its way and decides to delay everything until January or possibly longer, in those circumstances can the government continue with this. And with great regret, the bill will have to be pulled. We will have to go forward to a general election.
When the DUP, who were expected to abstain, came out against the programme motion, the government then offered MPs a vote on future negotiations.
Order. Programme motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
Move formally, thank you. Division! Clear the lobby.
The ayes to the right, 308. The noes to the left, 322.
So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Tonight, the House has refused to be bounced into debating a hugely significant piece of legislation in just 2 days, with barely any notice and an analysis of the economic impact of this bill. The Prime Minister is the author of his own misfortune.
Mr. Speaker, I must express my disappointment that the House has again voted for delay, rather than a timetable that would have guaranteed that the UK would be in a position to leave the EU on October the 31st with a deal. The EU must now make up their minds over how to answer Parliament's request for a delay. The government must take the only responsible course and accelerate our preparations for a no-deal outcome. I will speak to EU member states about their intentions. Until they've reached a decision, I must say, we will pause this legislation.
MPs rejected the motion 322 votes to 308, a majority of 14. As we just mentioned, Johnson threatened to give up on his deal and hold a general election, but it now looks like that might have just been a technique used to try and persuade MPs. Instead, Johnson has suspended the bill while he goes to the EU about the extension he requested at the weekend, perhaps to ask for a shorter November extension, which gives him just enough time to pass his deal. At this point, there are sort of 4 possible offers from the EU. a short technical extension, which is Johnson's preferred option, a January extension to maybe allow enough time for a quick general election to help get the deal through, a longer extension to June 2020 to allow for a general election or maybe even a second referendum, and finally the fourth option, a flextension which would last until January 31st of 2020, but giving the UK the option to extend on November 15th, December 1st, December 15th, January 1st or January 15th. According to Bruno Waterfield, the Times' Brussels correspondent, this is what Tusk was planning to offer the EU Council, and it would mean that the length of the extension could react to any delays in Johnson's Brexit bill. We'll keep you updated on this as it plays out, as the EU responds to the UK's extension request, and as the UK Parliament continues to examine Johnson's deal. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to be updated as all of this happens. You can also hit the bell icon if you want to be notified every time we release a video. And if you want more from us, you can find TLDR across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And if you want your name featured at the end of the videos, just like these people, then you can sign up to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.